Greetings, everyone. My name is Larry Hanson. I'm Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer for Conference Direct, and we want to welcome to our most current CD Live, our recurring podcast series we do. Joining me is my partner on this, Adam Briggs, our SVP of Operations overseeing our technology team, and our partner for experience design, Russell Harris. So what we're talking about today is experience design for meetings and events. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's probably my favorite part of meeting planning. It's really when a company or brand is looking to launch something new, whether that's a relaunch of their brand or a new product. It's how you really bring that experience to life at your meeting and event for your attendees to experience. And you have to think anything that customer sees, touches, eats, feels can be part of that experience design. And you can go very, very deep into this. In my past experience as a corporate meeting planner, I did a lot of experience design when we relaunched brands or products. And it's really fun when you start getting creative with your food and beverage or other pieces that touch those customers. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some best practices on that. So we'll get started. So Russell, being the expert in this, talk to us about, some pieces that you can bring to the table for experience design.
Okay. Well, basically what we would start with is like on an event or a conference, we start with the first impression is the most lasting. So we start with the arrivals. So we can kind of greet them with, something more like ambient lighting, music that builds some of the excitement so that we're like engaged in all the senses as they get into the room. So the room design kind of is going to reflect, the conference brand or some messaging. We can do screens around the audience, like immerse them into some visuals, so that it kind of puts it into a narrative, before like the keynote, if they're going to open with a keynote. So that way we can start with like a cinematic video that kind of starts telling a story that starts pulling everybody in emotionally, before the speaker even walks on the stage. And then we can kind of create some moments of surprise, like with a product demo or introduce it with lighting effects or some sound that kind of turns it into like more of a reveal. And the most important thing is the audience interaction. I think, attendees, usually want to use an app like to, talk on, topics or make, kind of vote on some kind of things or interaction with the speaker on that. So it kind of makes them part of the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, and I think, it's always important. The first step that I always would look at is understanding what they're the message or product or whatever they're trying to deliver. Who are those attendees? Because how you relate to a 20-year-old as compared to someone my age may be different. I'm all about the morning latte. I don't care about the evening drink. So it's understanding those pieces. And then the main thing I would always ask for up front is get that style guide if they have them. The challenge sometimes is they use meetings or events as a target. So as you're moving forward, a lot of times they're developing that vision. So that's the thing I've learned is they may not have a fully fleshed out vision of where they're going, but they use that meeting or event as a target. So you have to be kind of flexible. If it's something new, it may not be fully fleshed out, but understanding what the goal they're trying to reach and who those attendees are is key. And then getting into your part is good. But Adam, I know, Adam's our event technology, which there's a lot of customer facing pieces to that, but talk to us a little bit about how you might approach, integrating experience design into your products.
Yeah, I think it's one of the easily missed opportunities for planners is that when you think about event registration, it is typically the first experience the attendee has with the event on the front end, right? They go to the event website. It's their first exposure to the brand and to the vision for the event. And then same thing when they get to the event, it's the first experience they have arriving at the center of the meeting space or the hotel. So I think a lot of organizations, they have a focus on, maybe the stage and some other activations, but they forget about those two core pieces, which are really the first exposure people have. And let's face it, there's nothing worse than sitting in line at the bank or sitting in line at registration, looking at your watch every 30 seconds, waiting to get up to the reg area. But if a customer can, have fun with it, whether it's playing music or maybe some past hors d'oeuvres or, mocktails or cocktails, or maybe your morning latte, Larry. It'll help cut the time too, which will increase the attendance experience. Russell, you're nodding your head. What are some cool things you've seen in terms of that first introduction with the event design?
I guess really it's more of the interaction part, like you're talking about with AV and the technology. I mean, there's so much technology available today that we can kind of create that more connection when they first walk into that meeting, whether it be like, an 80-foot LED stage design like that has a lot of movement. We have a little bit of sound, a little bit of lighting, just to kind of set the tone for the actual meeting before it starts. And then that kind of just build off of that with all the new technology that we have.
Yeah, and I think, Reg, you bring up a pain point for most planners is that the queue up line with stanchions. I know when I did brand meetings, and I worked for Starwood Hotels, every reg for the brand had to be their lobby. So I had to build a Westin lobby, a St. Regis lobby, the entertainment, the food, always matched that. But what the hardest part, and Adam, I would love your insight, was that freaking name badge. They always want to be creative and like, how do you represent my brand on a name badge? And, what are some creative things? And, there isn't, other than some branding opportunities on it, it's a challenge. So, thinking of that, Adam, you've seen even more on reg and name badges and some stuff you've seen that's really been brought to life that is great.
Yeah, I think, I'll get to the name badges in a second, but one other piece about the whole check-in process, you mentioned the rope and stanchions, which, for certain size events, it's kind of a requirement. Yeah. But I think for a smaller event, and look at your scale, we've had a lot of success with, like, reg is basically a reception. And you can have, like, registration attendants walking the space with an iPad, checking people in and saying, whenever you're free, your badge is now ready over at the pickup area. So you're not having this lineup. You're kind of layering it into another activation that you were already planning, and that can really help increase the overall experience the guests have when they check in. But the badges, I mean, I think a lot of people, and listen, we all want them to look nice, but the real reason to have a name badge is for identification, whether it's for access controls or just I'm horrible with names, so if I'm at a reception, it's really a good crutch just to look down and see who I'm talking to, remember their name. So a lot of people forget the main purpose of it, and they get really over the top with design and the creative, which is important. But if you're doing so at the expense of like an 8-point font for the name, then it's not usable, right? So I think I would always remind our customers that let's first address the purpose of the thing, the badge, and then let's wrap around something attractive behind that. Now, you can play around with more real estate, instead of a 4x3, do a 4x6, and some other things. But the whole purpose of the badge is identification, and that should be the first consideration.
Yeah, you can also get creative on lanyards, et cetera, too. I know we did. And one thing I learned that really helped me with this is engaging your procurement team into this. And it depends on your company or what you do. But a lot of times they can leverage vendors. I know for us, Starbucks was a big vendor. So for all of our top brand conferences, if Starbucks was in their hotels, we'd set up a satellite Starbucks because it's part of the brand messaging. So in the reg area, which I was very happy about. But I learned very quickly procurement can have a lot of added value. And because if they can structure their agreements with some of their top vendors that they support meetings and events for that company or product, et cetera, can really help elevate and give you a bigger bang.
Absolutely. Well, there's some other things, to think about in terms of kind of extending that experience is there's like applications like walls.io where you can have monitors in the reg area that are pulling in from a social feed from the social feed for the organization. And so as people take pictures and post to social in the main common spaces, you can be, putting those into the space to really allow them to kind of crowdsource experiential marketing for the event. So there is some emerging technology that I think is pretty exciting. When you get into Bluetooth and beacons, you can do things like having personalized billboards and personalized displays based on their demographics or other information you might have. So that you know,
Yeah.
the technology is ever changing, and there's some really exciting things on the horizon.
Yeah, that's great. So, um, so knowing that the economy is really in flux right now, and there's going to be reduction in budgets, et cetera, why is experience design so important right now? And Russell, maybe start with you on that.
Okay. I think right now, because, you know, like you're talking about, the budgets are kind of tight and everything. I think it's basically we're trying to build like trust. You're solving some problems for the company and you're forming partnerships. And I think that's where experience design becomes like a competitive edge. So I think using the experience design, you kind of differentiate you from your competitors. It builds like the emotional connection that, you know, with all the decision makers. You know, it turns customers like into advocates, or, you know, for everybody who want to share it with their story and maybe with other potential clients, I think. And it also, I think, kind of also creates like loyalty. It kind of creates memories, from the event. And it makes people feel more, more than what they have to offer. Like, now I think experience design isn't not really like a luxury thing, like spending lots of money to get that wow effect. It's more like a business strategy.
100%, I agree with you. And I think how because knowing budgets are tight, a lot of internal meetings may get canceled, but they usually keep their sales meeting or their customer events. And, I always said leverage both of those. How we message to our sales was getting them excited about where this is going. And then customers was really to explain where that's at and why this is valuable for them, et cetera. So very similar, but those two audiences, to me, experience design is so important because our salespeople would walk away going, "Oh my God, I gotta get out and sell this," and being very excited on where it's going. But those are, and you don't have to spend. You can go a $5,000 budget to a $5 million budget. It just depends, who you are, what you're launching, and what your budget is. But there's different ways to create that excitement around it at different budgets too.
Right.
Yeah, Russell, kind of knowing it's important, but the reality is people are managing to a budget. So sometimes that's really where the end of the conversation is. Do you have any kind of low-hanging fruit, some low-cost options or low-effort options that people can look at if they are working on a more limited budget that can still have a big impact?
Right. I think it's just that it all becomes down to the design. Like we're designing the whole journey, from the minute they get there till the actual, the meeting, and then when they leave there. So it's like, I think from our standpoint, the biggest thing is like event flow, just a little simple like tweaks, like you're talking about, like some little, simple signage or something like that, or like a warm greeting from like a staff member, something like that. So these little bitty things that don't cost really anything because they're still part of the whole budget. Like you're talking about earlier, like, we personalize the whole experience, with just the name badges, or, the boards, the activations when they first get there, something like that. Or, we use like music or, lighting, to kind of create some emotions as they get there. Because, lighting is going to be there no matter what in any event. So, and to me, like lighting creates emotion. It kind of creates a connection with what the brand and what the messaging is trying to do with the whole thing. And then like what you're talking about too, I think it, with the, kind of creating interactive, walls, or, there I go, I flubbed. And then you just kind of ending it like on like a memorable kind of touch.
Yeah.
Like,
I think food and beverage is a really good one that's cheap and, you can get very creative with, with the look, taste, color of it. But, to Adam, to your point, when you talked about your website, your mobile app, the look, the know before you go, all your communication. And I know we've talked a lot kind of what's happening outside of the ballroom, but inside your content, you really need to rethink if you're launching a new product, what your speakers are, how they look, even how they're dressing, how St. Regis speaker dressed when I was at Starwood was completely different than how a W speaker. W was all black, wearing tennis shoes, and St. Regis was in a suit or tie. And so looking at those kind of touch pieces that don't cost a lot of money. You're already going to be doing them, but then get creative with it and how you message it out to your attendees. Like, please enjoy our opening reception, and then find those words in the branding, et cetera, that you can kind of play into that menu, that would bring it to life and makes it memorable. But you don't always have to spend a lot of money, but you can get creative in other ways.
That's what I think it is. I think it's more about not spending more. It's just about caring more about the details. Like you're talking about the little bitty details. I think that people pay more attention to those little bitty things. They don't look at the big things. They look at the little details.
I won't say the brand, but one brand had a 30-page document just on their floral guidelines. So candles were included. I'll let you figure out who that was. But I'd send this 200-page document to the company I worked with in Experience Design. But once you start learning it, it just kind of becomes part of your process. But, Russell, you've worked with a lot of our customers on this. Give us kind of a good example of someone that kind of integrated Experience Design and how it was successful for them.
Oh, my gosh. Right now, we have a financial client that we connected with. And right now, with experiential design, we produce now an annual conference on the West Coast for like 3,500 to 5,000 people. It turned into like we had 2 multi-year contracts on that. They added a second week conference onto the first week. So now, because it's not growing, because it's being very, very successful. And now we're producing an actual East Coast conference.
Yeah, and I know, talk to us a little bit, because I'm familiar with this customer, what they did that was out of the box, because most finance meetings, and nothing against any financial planners, are not considered the most exciting meetings in there, but their approach to this was very unique. And that's why I think it's kind of, even with something like finance, there's creative ways to approach it. So I think, give us some feedback of kind of what their vision was and how you implemented that.
What he did, he took it out, no offense to all the hotel people, but they took it out of the ballroom and they put it on the beach. Basically, this whole conference is built in a parking lot on a beach in between the actual hotel and the ocean on this. He made it very, very more casual. So people show up in shorts and polo shirts like this. From the Experience Design, we created all these different little booths, interactive booths like this with, lots of color. We come up with, messaging like branding. I don't like to call it themes, but more of a design. Like you're talking about, a style guide for that, and it's just really colorful, and it's outdoors, it's in the sun. It's like thinking about like lemonade stands, or something like the ice cream stand, just making it a little bit different, something that's not in a dark ballroom, but it was outdoors. And I think people are so gravitated towards that because they can walk to the beach. We do some activities on the beach, so it's just a continuous like engagement as people go through the conference.
Yeah. And Adam, any insights on our website? I always say the most creative, I think, are incentives, which are really Experience Design. Just you're motivating your sales. But what have you seen unique out there in the event technology on website, mobile app, or other tools?
I think the area that I'm impressing upon our customers is really getting the messaging right. Is, for the longest time, and even now, people, it's like, oh, come to our event. It has 3,000 attendees, 400 exhibitors. And what does that mean, right? Like, you want to be selling the value to the attendee. Why should they be attending? They're not going because there's 4,000 people going. They're going because of the networking, right? They're not going because of 600 exhibitors. They're going because, gain visibility into the next generation of technology for this industry, right? So it's really flipping the script on the messaging, because I think people have gotten really complacent and really stuck in the mud in terms of messaging, and it's just not resonating with attendees. And if you want to convert attendees, you need to make sure you're reimagining your messaging so that it's attendee centric. It's not statistics about the event. It's why should they be there? Why should they invest not only their money but their time to come and be at the event? So that's it's
interesting. When I work with some companies, et cetera, on this, that they'd always say, we want our event site to be like Apple's, which is very, very graphic imagery. I said, that's great, but there is a purpose to this. So I was always a little bit of a battle for them to get, but this is who we are, and we want it very clean and modern, to there is a purpose of it, making sure attendees understanding with agenda, attire, all that kind of stuff. So it was a fine line. I have to kind of learn to walk with them, that you'd have the purpose and the creative kind of meld together. But sometimes your marketing creative people have a different vision and want to be completely out of the box, that it kind of loses the purpose, exactly what you talked about on the name badges. So, but, first, I mean, if you're not already doing this, there's great resources out there with companies, et cetera. But Russell, kind of where would you tell a planner, hey, here's a great place to get started on? Other than just working with you, which is a great option too.
Well, that's number one. You start with me. No. I just think, the first thing that we do is just the collaboration part of it. I think a lot of conference managers, stuff like that, they don't think that they, don't know how to do it. So I think they should come to us first, like we talked about before, like sit down with me and you, Melissa, whatever, kind of figure out, what's the goal, what's the visions, what we can do, and let us come up with the actual, direction, for the client. So that way we can go in and we can help support them in the actual sell and the presentation, of the experiential design. Because I think a lot of people, I don't know a lot about, the meeting planning part, the attrition and all this other stuff, the hotel stuff. So basically, kind of just focusing on what I do the best is basically like supporting like you're talking about the brand, the messaging, to get the client to buy in to the experiential design.
And I think it's, I used to follow and this is getting old school, but I buy every design magazine. I follow weird events. I always followed Burning Man. I always remember I went to my company I used, and there was this huge, like, 20-foot light bright that everyone could go in. So I was like, I have to have this. I made her build it finally. But, there's things that kind of are creative out of the box that you want to look for, that those are the things that make that event memorable. And it could be your opening production, do something other than a video that really, gets people excited. But you've got to find those resources out there, and TikTok's great. Social has added a whole new dimension of finding creative, exciting entertainment, looks, feels. So just, you got to be passionate about it and really be engaged in design and look and feel, et cetera, to get these ideas. And then task your Russell Harris to build it, to create it.
Now, you just brought up a good point. Don't be afraid if you can make the budget work, is kind of audit other events and go to an event and see what they're doing and pick up ideas and talk to your peers about different ideas they have. And I've found some of the most creative things at other events, and it's like, oh, that was a great execution.
Yeah, there's different shows like Biz Bash or Special Event. There's a really good one in Montreal that does this. There's even ones focused on entertainment that you can find that new kind of creative entertainment. But I'd always look at Burning Man or music festivals or Coachella. Coachella's great with some funky, unique stuff that makes it memorable too.
Yeah, the Montreal show is C2, which is a great one.
Yeah, C2, which is great. Yeah.
But also, I want everybody to remember too that we don't have to start out with like $1 million budget. You can always start small and just kind of to kind of like test the waters and just kind of show them this is how we can make we can stretch that budget and kind of create a little bit of I call it the ROE, your return on the experience for the conference, for the meeting.
And then find out what resonates. I remember I always used to do a big sales conference for about 3,000, and we went away from that opening video to creating this live production opening. But then we created this monster, but everyone expected, what are we doing? We flew our president in from the ceiling, or different things that people make it memorable and connect you to it. It may not be totally 100% on brand. We would find a way to twist it, but it just would make it memorable. So, thinking outside the box is really key. And we kind of talk cost effective, but, what are some pitfalls you've seen, Russell, where people have come at it and maybe not approached it the right way?
I think the number one is like designing like for yourself and not, for your audience. I know a lot of people, this is what I want to do. This is what I think the ways to go, but they're not really looking about who are they trying to attract to the actual, event. And then a lot of people, I think they overload the whole experience. They try doing too much. when sometimes less is more. So I think that,
Yeah.
you know, that's a major thing. And I think too, from like a sales standpoint, you know, for getting the follow through, you know, I know a lot of, you know, the salespeople, you know, after the whole event, you know, that, you know, when we try to create the branding, the messaging, that there's not a level of follow up on that. And then I think cool, you know, prioritizing like the flash over the feeling, like you're talking about too, what resonates most with them. It's more like the connection and the feeling that they
Yeah.
walk with. And then one of the biggest things I think is this support, you know, from staff and management, you know, from a standpoint, making sure that everybody's trained, you know, everybody knows what's going on, you know, the directions, you know, what's going on, you know, what the agenda is and stuff like that. I think that's probably what the most pitfalls we've come across.
Yeah, I know we used to always outfit waiters, different
Right.
outfits, change our ratio to better. Sometimes I've even hired models to be the waiters, instead of staff. Nothing against our banquet wait staff, but they wanted a certain look and feel. So there's, you know, things that we talked about. It can go so many different directions, but you always have to think, what is every single touch point that attendee experience has, and then map that out, and then how do you bring it to life with a budget or without a budget, you know? So,
Right.
but
Well,
you know
and
that, yeah, go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
yeah, I was going to say the kind of overall theme though is that the experience design should supplement and support the mission and the goals. It
Absolutely.
shouldn't drown them out. And
Absolutely.
so it should be something where your target is to tinker with things to amplify what you're trying to accomplish, not just wipe it away.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%.
And it can be
But-
done in so many different ways too. Little bitty, you know, little bitty focal points here and there. It's easy to do.
So our time is kind of wrapping up, gentlemen. Any closing comments from either of you before we end it here?
Kind
Call-
of just gave mine.
Let's start a conversation. Let's, you know, I just want everybody, you know, to kind of, you know, not be afraid to reach out, you know, and nothing's too small on that side, that, you know, just to get the conversation started.
Yeah, and my comment is just get started. You know, it's very easy to do the same meeting over and over, and it may be successful, but there's little things you can do that is going to enhance your attendee experience and connect them more to that company, association, or brand. This can be even done in association meetings. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this. And as a quick sales pitch, Conference Direct, in partnership with Russell, does do experience design. So you know, you can always reach out to us. But thank you for taking the time today, and we appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.